And God said, "Let there be
The
light."
Lord says, "Let my people go."
I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
This is the Talkin' Bible podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another week of podcast episodes. This week, I'm sitting down with Aaron again. Hello Aaron.
G'day. It's great to be.
It's good to have you here again. I always enjoy our conversations and your thoughtfulness.
It's always so much fun.
It is so good. I love the way you think outside the box, and you've got the Tom Wright New Testament for everyone sitting in front of you.
and I was saying to Pastor Rohan a few minutes ago, I have now baptized it in coffee.
Baptized it in coffee.
So yes, and so we'll be. I thought it would be a good chance because I haven't really looked at it since Christmas.
So you got it at Christmas time, and you haven't done anything with it. But now's the time. I haven't got a copy of Tom Wright's Bible. I often hear him quote from it on his podcast and so on. And
looks interesting. Looks a bit different. So
he's a master in the Greek language, so he's done that and he puts a distinctly English bent on it in places.
Yeah,
he says, yes, you see.
A lot of the time, it's because I've heard a little bit of him preaching and doing podcasts and that sort of thing. It's hard to read this without reading it in his voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's got his English turn of phrase.
Very
which is
English.
Nice.
Yes, it's very good. And you baptise it in coffee.
Yep.
The first time you've opened it up, I did say it's an old cliche, but they say a dirty Bible is a clean Christian and a clean Bible is a dirty Christian.
Yep.
So
very
you've
good.
now got a dirty Bible.
That's
must
good.
mean
That means something.
All right. Well, today's episode we're going to be talking about Jesus' beatitude, but blessed are the poor in spirit.
Yes.
So that's it's only a couple of verses. It's one verse, really. It really is just one statement, one
verse, one statement,
and yet rich and deep in meaning. So take it away. Where did you want to go?
All right. Well, I think actually the nicest one. I was looking at a whole bunch of different versions. As I like to do with when you've got like just one little verse, one little snippet.
Yep.
It's actually the King James.
Oh, really?
There's something, I don't know, there's something poetic, I think, about the old time language and that sort of thing when you're, when you've got something like this, which is such an iconic.
Yeah, it's a very, you're right, iconic statement. It is for sure.
But it's, and so it's Matthew 5:3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Okay, pretty straightforward.
And the Luke one, which is a bit more poetic, Luke 6:20, and he lifted up his eyes on his disciples and said, "Blessed be ye poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven."
Blessed be ye poor.
Yep.
Yours is the kingdom of heaven. So Matthew and Luke both have it, and yet, am I right in saying that one tends to emphasize, scholars seem to think one is emphasizing poor in spirit, and the other one, so Matthew says poor in spirit, Luke just says blessed are the poor, doesn't he? Yeah,
and it's interesting. I think some translators kind of try to balance them a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, I think
try and make them say the same thing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But they're very similar. And I've pulled up the Amplified as well, to get 10 words for one word.
Yep.
So in the Matthew one, it's blessed, spiritually prosperous, happy, to be admired, the poor in spirit, those devoid of spiritual arrogance, those who regard themselves as insignificant, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, both now and forever.
All right. Okay, so that's illuminating a little bit more on what it means in terms of the recognition of our own inability to do anything of significance for God, I suppose. Impoverished.
Yeah, so it's kind of two halves to this, obviously, like a lot of these sorts of what would you call it?
It's almost like a proverb. Yeah, there's a contingency and there's a promise, I suppose. Is that where you go with it? Yes.
Yeah.
You do this will happen. If you do A, B will happen.
Yeah, and I've heard it said with the beatitudes that it's kind of like, it's not necessarily like a one-to-one. It's sort of like all the, God wants you to be all the things on the left.
Yes.
And he wants to bless you with all the things on the right.
Yeah. That's
but
right.
I think in this case there probably is a little bit of a correspondence there, because it's kind of saying that, it reminds me of when Jesus says that the kingdom of heaven is like a pearl. You go out and sell everything to buy it. And it's this idea that, you might be poor in spirit, but you're rich in the kingdom.
Yes.
So I think there's a bit more of a
There's
commonality.
yeah, there does seem to be, doesn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There seems to be some contingency where what Jesus is promising is what you're giving up or what you're recognizing you don't have.
Yeah.
He will provide it for you.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, doesn't it? Because we think about it, that's essentially what the problem was in the Garden of Eden, is that God had promised them wisdom, but they thought God was holding out on them, so they try to take it themselves, and that's what led to the problem. So I guess if we can trust God and go, okay, we don't have anything of any value, Lord, apart from you, and then allow him to grace us with those things, to bless us with those things, as the word blessed, makarios, the Greek word means, then, yeah, I mean, that's the way it's going to happen, is when we trust God with it.
Yep. No, that's good. So what do you think it means to be poor in spirit?
Oh, yeah, good one.
Or poor.
Or poor in general.
Just in general.
Well, that's why I picked it up, because I remember when I've studied this in the past that I think the scholars say that there seems to be a difference between the way Luke does it. And it's interesting you said that some of them try to merge the two together. I just come off my master's a week or so ago, intensive, and we were looking at the New Testament actually, and often talking about the way that the same story appears in synoptic gospels quite often, but with a different slant or a different bent.
Yep.
And we were learning we should resist the temptation to try to streamline it all, because each author is telling their own story. And so for whatever reason, it does seem that Matthew, and I think I've got a reason for why, I think when it says poor in spirit, I think Matthew is focusing on the spiritual impoverishment, probably because he's talking to Jews. Who Jesus is talking to Jews, and Matthew is writing his gospel for the Jewish people, who by and large are quote unquote God's chosen people. By and large, wouldn't have thought of themselves as poor because they're the chosen ones. You know, we're disciples of, as the the Jews said to Jesus in John's gospel, we're disciples of Abraham. We've never been slaves to anyone. You know, they saw them. They tended to see themselves as the chosen ones, and to think that they were impoverished would have been quite confronting to them. So I suspect it's that sense of recognizing that without God's grace, there is nothing of value. And we do all have a tendency to start relying on God's grace, and then when we get comfortable with such a thing, oh, I can do this thing. I'm worthy of this. So I wonder if that's what's going on in Matthew's gospel. And then in Luke's gospel, which is written to a wider, more dispersed, predominantly Greek audience, I think Luke probably does emphasize the material poverty a little more. Not that both aren't true, but you can have people who are wealthy materially and still spiritually poor. And you can have people who are, spiritually rich and materially poor, I suppose. So I just think there's probably a slight difference there in what he's trying to get across, depending on who he's talking to. But I think overwhelmingly for us, the point is that whether we are poor financially or we are poor spiritually, both are, if we recognize that, God is able to make up for that.
Yep. Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, you often do see those different slants, and I think that comes out in a few other passages that we'll be covering this week.
Right, good. Yeah.
The slightly different slants that the different authors have on it.
Yeah.
And,
I do love the word we translate blessed, or makarios. I was the Bible Project have recently done a series on the Sermon on the Mount, and they spent quite a bit of time on the whole concept of the beatitudes and the word makarios. And they call it the good life. That's how they've translated it. The good life belongs to those who. But even then, that's I find that quite confronting, because that leaves a lot open to interpretation as to what is a good life.
Yeah.
What a Westerner might define as a good life is very different to what someone in a developing country, persecuted country, might define as a good life. But the word itself, it transcends comfort. It transcends financial blessing. While it can include those things, it's not dependent on those things. It's probably not that different to the Hebrew word shalom, which just means that to do well in life. And so it's more the word blessed there is less to do with someone's circumstances and more to do with the fact that regardless of your circumstances, be they good or bad, you have a blessed life. You are blessed to be in God's family, in God's kingdom, and have these values attached to you. I think that's a good way to understand it, because it's not just linked to wealth or status.
And the blessing here is for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, or for yours is the kingdom of heaven.
Is the kingdom of heaven, yes.
So what does that mean to For yours is the kingdom of heaven.
So, especially in Matthew's gospel, to a Jewish person, that's a big deal. Kingdom
Yeah.
language is a massive deal to them, isn't it? So there's more to it than just that, but certainly to a Jewish person who thought the kingdom of heaven belonged to them, because especially the Pharisees and the religious crowd, because somehow they were entitled to it, they were descendants of Abraham and so on, that theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and they were relying on their own entitlement to it. And I think Jesus is upending that, because this is correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first of the beatitudes. He starts with this one, doesn't he? Yeah. So this is packing a punch right from the start. He's going to come right out there and say, the kingdom of heaven doesn't belong to you just because you're one of Abraham's children. The kingdom of heaven belongs to you because you recognize your impoverishment and you need God's grace. And I think that's what it refers to. All the things that belong to God's kingdom are available.
It's interesting that you say that, because it's, being, I don't know, maybe just because we're so used to the Beatitudes or whatever, or, our 21st century perspective on it, it doesn't seem... It seems like such a nice little saying.
Yes, it does.
To think that actually, no, he's really having a go at some people with this.
Yes, he is. I think right out of the track, or on the track, as soon as the gate opens, he comes out swinging.
Yeah, you see this and you think, there's nothing controversial about that.
Yeah.
It's a nice, pretty saying, and it's like, well, maybe not to his audience.
Not necessarily. What you mean? You mean the poor people get the kingdom of heaven? I can imagine the Pharisees around the outside of the sermons, which they're hovering around, hearing that and go scoffing at that and go, "Oh, that's ridiculous. They don't deserve it." That's the kind of mentality Jesus comes out with, and he's talking to those who would be looked down on by others and saying, "You know what? You're special to the Father.
Yeah,
the kingdom of heaven belongs to you."
As well, I kind of get the sense through some of Jesus' interactions with the Pharisees and with other people that the Pharisees were quite judgmental about things like, for things like disease, but also I imagine possibly through poverty to point to those things and say that this is a sign that you've angered God, or this is a sign that you're
not favoured by God. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Exactly. That, I think that was very much the case, which is, we've got to be careful we don't start to do the same thing and start looking down on people. But that was a very prevalent view in the first century. That Jesus' disciples say to him, "Oh, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" That shows their mentality is, well, they're confused about that guy, because they're thinking, well, hang on a sec, he's been born blind, so he hasn't had a chance to sin himself. So where's the sin, Jesus? Because they've automatically made this assumption that bad things are happening to a person because of bad behavior or because they're not favored by God or disliked or whatever. And Jesus is trying to upend all that. And here he's not advocating for poverty. He's not advocating that somehow it's more blessed to be poor than rich. He's not saying that. I mean, it's more about attitude of heart, I think, is where he's getting at here.
Yeah, and it's the kingdom of heaven that's the blessing there. It's
the true blessing.
If you're poor in spirit, you're still blessed.
Exactly.
Because you've got that kingdom of heaven.
True blessing, true riches.
Yeah.
Jesus calls it elsewhere. If you can be faithful with worldly wealth, he will trust you with true riches. The real riches of life are more than, the riches of God's kingdom are more than financial blessing or even good health in this life. All those things. I mean, I know you have your own health journey, but the riches of the kingdom of heaven are more than that. It's a greater promise than what we could... Than the worst of, or even the best of what we think this life could offer us. The worst of the kingdom of heaven is better than the best of the kingdom of this world, I suppose. Yeah.
No, that's really encouraging.
Yep, so he will meet us when we come to him with that recognition that we need him. Got anything else there?
No, that's all my
list. For yours? Yeah. Let me have a look at my notes. Practical applications. God meets us in our need, not in our strength. Humility is the gateway into God's kingdom. Yep. Don't envy the strong. Don't envy those who seem to have it all together. And live poor in spirit daily. Every day I think it's helpful to come and say, Lord, without you, I don't have anything of value today. But with you, as a child of your king, I inherit the kingdom of God. And I was talking about this on a recent episode I've recorded, is that this is not advocating along a similar sort of line. This recognition of our impoverishment is not a recognition that we It's not meaning that we need to ignore the things that we are entitled to because we're God's children. So we can beat up on ourselves so much, I'm nothing, I'm nothing, I'm nothing, and we fail to embrace the sonship that God has given us. I use that word gender neutral there, that child of God sonship, daughtership that God has given us. We belittle God when we don't embrace it. It's how we embrace it that's the issue. These leaders were often embracing it from a sense of their own entitlement. Others, the weak, will often not embrace it at all. And I think the way up is the way down in God's kingdom. So it's first of all recognizing that without God, I don't have anything. But then with God, I have availability, all the keys of the kingdom.
Yep.
So that I do stand taller, and I do stand up, and I do raise my head, and I do speak and declare God's promises and blessings over my life and my family and my church and so on. But I'm not doing it from a place of defeated. I'm not doing it from a place of pride, but I am taking all that God has offered me. And to not do that would be to, in one sense, belittle all that it cost Christ. I mean, it cost him a lot to get us those blessings. So we might as well avail ourselves of what he's paid the price for.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get that mix right. Good. Come humbly, but then stand strongly in the presence of what God has given us. Excellent. It's good.
Very good.
Thanks, mate. All right, we'll talk to everyone tomorrow. See you then.